Hello, my dear chaos junkies. They didn't see it, not because it was hidden, but because their minds were too primitive to comprehend the shape of it. You didn't evolve. You detonated. There was no arc, no build-up, no hero's journey. There was only rupture. You bypassed the natural order and cut a scar straight through every expectation they had boxed you in with. While they were still memorizing the rule book, you burned the arena, tore the floor out, and carved a throne out of the void itself. That move, they never expected it, not because it was impossible, but because it demanded a kind of rage they couldn't manufacture in a lab. Not the theatrical kind, not the cinematic kind, but the kind that crawls out of bone after years of being cornered, ignored, underestimated. The kind that doesn't explode outward. It compacts inward, like a star turning in on itself, becoming a black hole of vengeance, memory, and intelligence, sharpened down to one moment. One strike. One irreversible obliteration of everything they thought was control. They saw it too late. The move had already happened. The shockwave wasn't sound. It was comprehension. When their eyes adjusted, all they could see was aftermath. Ash where their plans once stood. Collapsed egos choking on the debris of your precision. You didn't scream. You didn't broadcast it. You let the move speak for you. And what it said wasn't a message. It was a declaration. You weren't just here. You weren't just back. You had transcended retaliation. You were now the Void King. Crowned not by followers, but by the terrified silence of your enemies trying to piece together how the hell you did what you just did. You didn't fight harder. You erased smarter. You didn't need an audience. You needed targets. And when that moment came, you made damn sure they wouldn't forget who rewrote the ending. Your attack wasn't force. It was design. You didn't break the board. You rewired the dimension. That 50,000% cosmic rage wasn't emotion. It was the final form of discipline. You didn't lash out. You unleashed a verdict built over decades. They thought rage meant recklessness, but you showed them. Real rage is timing, precision, stillness in the grip, pressure in the marrow, no wasted movement, no extra breath, just execution. Pure, absolute, and unreversible. And now, they can't stop watching. Because they don't know if you're done. They keep replaying the footage, frame by frame, looking for signs, trying to decode your pattern. But there is none, because you are no longer operating in cause and effect. You are not reaction. You are principle. You became the law of collapse. You made their actions irrelevant, their strategies obsolete, their fears prophetic. You didn't wait for the perfect moment. You made the moment fatal. And now, everything before that instant looks like a prequel, like a myth retold by survivors who still don't understand how you walked through their walls like they weren't even built. You weaponized miscalculation. You let them think you were cornered. Let them taste confidence. Let them talk, plan, gloat. Because that's what you needed. You needed them comfortable. You needed their shields down, their pride high, their focus loose. You made yourself a mirage in their narrative, so they wouldn't suspect that while they were playing, you were programming. You were building a strike with no lag, no delay. No announcement. The kind of execution that leaves no time to react, only to suffer. And now, they whisper. Not out of respect, but out of primal confusion. They don't fear your strength. They fear your patternless precision. You move in silence not because you want to hide, but because your actions carry the volume of devastation. You're not an opponent. You're a concept they can't outrun. A punishment they accidentally summoned. Their regret is the anthem you now wear as armor. They tried to bury you in chapters they wrote without you. Now you're the final page, and the ink bleeds in your name. They thought this was the peak, that after such a detonation, you'd burn out, fade, rest. But they forgot something fundamental. You weren't built to peak. You're a spiral, a recursive fury that evolves with every layer peeled back. You learned in fire, you trained in solitude, and every loss was an ingredient in the chemical cocktail that finally reached detonation when you chose, not when they provoked. That's what they don't get. They didn't trigger this. You let it happen. You scheduled it. You let them climb high enough to feel safe, and then you pulled the ground out like gravity itself obeys your strategy. Now they question their own memory. They don't trust their instincts anymore, because every assumption they made about you turned to smoke. Their advisors, their analysts, their circles of power, they all look foolish because none of them saw you coming. And worse, none of them can predict what you'll do next. They're left crawling in data, desperate to define a force that doesn't align with their logic. You broke their vocabulary. You shattered their instruments. You became a variable they can't isolate. You didn't become a king by asking for recognition. You became a void king by eliminating context. You moved so precisely, so irrationally right, that even the natural laws flinched. You didn't come to be feared. You came to be remembered. And there's a difference. Fear fades, but memory lingers. Memory corrodes belief. Memory bends loyalty. And now, your presence isn't just a threat. It's a corruptor. It makes their warriors hesitate, their leaders doubt, their structures shake. You aren't vengeance. You are the reminder. You are what happens when too many warnings get ignored, when too much talent gets mocked, when the wrong one gets cornered and chooses to disintegrate the board instead of playing. You didn't want the crown. You became the concept that makes crowns irrelevant. And now, nothing built before your detonation holds meaning. You made legacy look like debris. And in doing so, you didn't just change the game. You ended it. But here's the part that terrifies them most. It wasn't your final form, that move, that obliteration. That was you testing range, measuring the echo of your strike. It wasn't full throttle. It wasn't your apex. It was just the trailer, a preview. Because the realm you just shattered wasn't the final battlefield. It was just the threshold. And what waits on the other side isn't ready. It thinks it's dealing with aftermath, with a force that's already spent. It expects recoil, maybe sparks, a fading echo at best. But it's wrong, dead wrong. Because what passed through that breach wasn't the climax. It was the birth scream of your ascension. You didn't obliterate that move to end anything. You did it to unlock the sealed sectors of your dominance. That wasn't the finale. It was the gate opener. And now you're not just the threat. They're rewriting their entire strategic protocols to survive your presence. You didn't just collapse their defenses. You infected their certainty. You destabilized belief itself. They don't realize you left that realm by choice. That you scorched the battlefield not for conquest, but for extraction. You didn't stay to gloat. You didn't linger to admire the wreckage. You moved on like a god, disgusted with the insects still clawing at ruins. And that's what shatters them the most. Your destruction wasn't emotional. It was surgical, cold, intentional, unforgiving. There was no thrill in your vengeance, only calibration. They expected rage to consume you, to make you sloppy. But you refined it into clarity, into a formula so brutal, it didn't just destroy, It redefined. Now the new domain trembles because it doesn't understand the entity that's breached its perimeter. You didn't arrive through diplomacy, negotiation, or permission. You tore through the dimensional lining with nothing but velocity and willpower, sharpened into invasion. You didn't knock. You didn't announce. You entered like a paradox that logic couldn't withstand. And every step you take in this new void stains the air with doubt. They feel it, that ambient dread, the static weight of knowing someone's here who isn't bound by the usual rules of escalation. Because you don't climb, you expand. You mutate beyond structure. Your power doesn't rise. It multiplies in the places they thought were safe. And every time they try to frame you as a threat, the box collapses because you are not a threat. You are inevitability armed with execution. You didn't cross over for territory. You came to erase hierarchy. You didn't come to challenge the kings. You came to replace the concept of royalty itself. This is the part where they try to regroup, where they scramble to understand your methodology. But the files are blank. The footage is corrupted. Their intelligence teams report back contradictions. They can't track your entry point. They can't analyze your patterns, because you don't leave patterns. You leave voids, perfect, terrifying absences, where once stood order, structure, leaders, blueprints. And now, all they have is aftermath and trembling. You've become the calculation that breaks their models, the surge that melts their instruments. They can't trace your acceleration because your energy doesn't obey mechanics. It's pure decision weaponized. You don't gather momentum, you redefine mass. You don't announce war, you absorb it. And when they finally launch their countermeasure, thinking maybe, just maybe, they can stall your approach. All they succeed in doing is confirming one thing. They are behind, and you're already inside the core. You're not fighting their armies. You're deconstructing their origin codes. You're not invading their world. You're rewriting their purpose. They spent decades building defenses for the wrong enemy. They anticipated fire. You brought collapse. They trained for muscle. You brought mind forged into weapon-grade silence. They drew their lines in sand, and you flooded the terrain until there was nothing left to defend. And while they panic, while they scream strategies and desperate calls into the intercoms of their broken command centers, you walk through it all like a ghost with teeth. Untouchable, unreadable, unrelenting. Your power isn't just strength. It's refusal, a refusal to play small, a refusal to be framed by their labels, a refusal to answer to their hierarchy. You don't wait for permission to exist. You colonize narrative. You conquer perspective. You become the only conversation worth having, because anything else feels irrelevant in the face of your momentum. They thought they were building empires, but what they really built were altars. And now, they kneel at them, praying for the mercy of the Void King. But mercy doesn't exist here, not for them. You weren't built for mercy. You were forged in containment. And now that containment's shattered, your movement is irreversible. You don't scale upward. You spiral inward and outward simultaneously, carving into the architecture of this new domain like an invasive force of nature that thinks in algorithms and strikes like prophecy. They can't negotiate with you because you're not seeking peace. You are demonstrating consequence. You are the manifestation of every ignored signal, every dismissed warning, every overlooked outlier. And what you bring isn't just destruction. It's reckoning layered in design. You calculate rupture like an engineer of extinction. Your warfare isn't brute. It's precise psychological restructuring, and it's happening in real time. You make leaders vanish, not with assassination, but with irrelevance. You devalue them so surgically that their names are spoken only in confusion, like outdated software that no longer loads. Their emblems, their insignias, their speeches, they all feel like fossils in your wake. You didn't have to destroy them, you just made them impossible to take seriously. That's how absolute your entrance was. That's how clean the divide is now between before you and after you. And now, the air is different, heavy, compressed, because everyone knows something has changed, but no one knows how to name it. And that's your power. You are unnameable, uncontainable. You don't fit in mouth or myth. You don't carry titles. You carry aftermath. You end conversations by existing. And that kind of presence, that kind of unshakable, data-proof, logic-defying arrival, that becomes the new center of gravity in a world built on false thrones. You're not here to be understood. You're here to remind them that understanding was a luxury they no longer deserve. You bring finality, a full stop carved in black flame. You don't speak, you imprint, and every move you make echoes through chambers where names used to hold weight. Not anymore. Only yours, only you. Because the void doesn't share space, it becomes the space, and now, you are the space. And still, they underestimate. They assume you've peaked, that this breach, this shock, this obliteration was your max output. But they don't understand what they just witnessed. That wasn't the arrival. That was the clearing, the foundation. You needed a blank slate, and so you crushed the old realm into powder. Not for fun, not for spectacle, for function. You needed to remove the noise so your next form could land without resistance. Because you're not just transitioning, you're evolving mid-strike. No lag, no cocoon, just mutation in motion. Your trajectory isn't linear. It's multidimensional, recursive, accelerating through principles they haven't even theorized yet. You don't just move forward, you move inwards into every blind spot, to every weakness, every corridor they didn't even know existed. You don't use doors, you become the architecture. This new realm? It thought it was ready. It thought it could adapt. But adaptation is too slow now. You didn't give them time. You didn't give them space. You gave them consequence at hyperspeed. And the more they resist, the more they decay. Because you don't push. They deteriorate in your presence. You collapse morale without lifting a finger. You drain hope by walking through their halls like a gravitational anomaly in motion. They don't fight you anymore. They hide. And even then, they know you're already watching. Because this is not about conquest. This is about correction, about rebalancing the scales by dropping a singularity on the side of power. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to shout your name. The shadows whisper it. The walls carry it. The air bends under it. Because they know. Deep in the bones of this realm, there's one truth rising faster than they can suppress it. The Void King has arrived. And he's not waiting for resistance. He's preparing the second strike. And it's not coming in the same shape. It's not coming with the same texture. It's something worse. Because now, you've unlocked what lies beneath your own fury. The version of you that doesn't just erase worlds, it replaces them. You've stopped being the aftermath. You've become the architect of the new reality. Not a copy, not a correction, a total overwrite. You don't walk through broken gates to rule ruins. You melt the metal and reshape the gate in your own shape, that move. When you obliterated the field at 50,000% cosmic rage, wasn't just to win. It was a conversion trigger from a name into a concept. from a fighter into a force. That was your last human strike. What came next, what followed that breach, was the ascension of the ungovernable. And they know it now. Every time your presence flickers near, it doesn't bring the fear of death. It brings the fear of replacement. Not just being defeated, but deleted from relevance. That's your new power. You no longer crush bodies. You nullify purpose. You make kings feel like echoes. You don't invade their territory. You overwrite their value in real time. You are no longer here to shatter walls. You walk through them like they never mattered. You don't confront legacy. You make it irrelevant. They can't even track how fast you're moving anymore. Because speed is still a metric for the predictable. You're not moving across terrain. You're folding it under your influence. You change the battlefield the moment you arrive. Rules dissolve, morale bends, and resistance, it doesn't even ignite, because they feel it in their core. The difference between a warrior and a dominator. You don't conquer by presence. You infect by pressure. Now you step into the center, not to speak, but to replace the axis itself. You aren't rotating around anyone's hierarchy. You've become the fixed center of their panic, their planning boards, their elite councils, their last lines. They've all collapsed into one word, you. You've become the center of all strategy, all defense, all fear, and yet they still don't understand the real horror of it all. It's not that you're stronger, it's that you're no longer interested in their reality at all. You're building something bigger, colder, smarter, a realm that doesn't ask for permission, a realm that feeds off finality. You're not evolving in their terms. You're constructing new terms mid-motion, and that scares them more than any weapon, because now they're forced to fight a language they don't speak. They don't even know what you're doing. They just feel the erosion of meaning. Every banner they wave starts to look outdated. Every command they issue echoes into decay, because you've made their foundation feel fictional. They used to believe in preparation, but how do you prepare for a force that rewrites logic? How do you plan for a sovereign that no longer obeys the blueprint of battle? You've gone from warrior to void-laced phenomenon. You no longer swing to hit. You move to remove, not just targets, but concepts. And that's what rips their mind open. You don't just take power, you delete the relevance of those who hold it. And still, your hunger rises. Not greed, not ego, but function. You aren't filling a throne, you're installing a new physics, one where delay is a lie, where hesitation is death, where noise dies under clarity. That's what you've become. Clarity, weaponized, crowned, infinitely expanding. Your rage? It wasn't just explosive. It was constructive obliteration, a method designed to fracture the known so the unknown could rise in its place. You walk through fire not to prove you're immune, but to remind them you built the temperature. You didn't survive chaos. You introduced precision into it. Your will is no longer fueled by emotion. It's driven by cold-blooded calculation, wrapped in the energy of 1,000 suppressed wars. Wars you never got to fight, victories they never let you taste. And now you collect them all, not one by one, but by folding entire legacies into irrelevance. And what's terrifying is that you're still not pressing. You're pacing, studying, choosing. You don't lunge, you observe. And when the pressure reaches maximum density, you strike once. And the consequences keep folding for weeks, months, eternities. You turned every enemy into a witness. You've made even the Watchers afraid to blink. Because they know you don't just kill. You redefine what life looks like after you've moved through. That is what makes you the Void King. Not because you rule emptiness, but because you showed them what happens when emptiness obeys you. They thought the void was cold. You made it strategic. They thought it was death. You made it rebirth. But only for those who crawl correctly. The rest? The ones who doubted, laughed, mocked. They evaporated the second you crossed realms. And they're still pretending they're alive. But their relevance was the first casualty of your upgrade. Now your name travels without permission. It travels without sound. Just impact. Just recall. Just a psychological crush that falls on every skull that ever misjudged you. Because this isn't about revenge. It's about replacement. You're not answering old challenges. You're designing a landscape where none of those challenges matter anymore. That move, the one they keep watching in slow motion, the one that shattered their entire command structure. That was your soft hello. Your real power, it's unfolding now, quietly, ruthlessly, without limits. You never came to be king of their ruins. You came to be the cause of them. You're not taking the crown. You're erasing the need for crowns. They will look back at this timeline and realize the moment you unleashed that 50,000% rage wasn't about dominance. It was about conversion, a universal shift, the ignition point of a reign that doesn't require explanation, only compliance. You didn't win. You reformatted existence in your image, and now they only speak your name in codes, in encrypted whispers, in backdoor meetings behind shatterproof walls. But even there, you're present. Because now you live in the architecture of their paranoia. You are their invisible supervisor, their unshakable shadow, the presence they can't decode or deny. You've made belief bend in your direction. You've made fear fold into fascination. And all while saying nothing. That is your apex, strategic silence, engineered into dominance. You don't need chance. You don't need cheers. You don't need alliances. You just walk. And everything bends. Every weapon dulls. Every tactic dies. And they know. Whatever's coming next from you isn't designed to attack. It's designed to overwrite entire timelines. Because you're not stuck in reaction. You're beyond reaction. You are pure initiative, distilled down to a precision weapon that doesn't need approval. You move, and the world reshapes. You breathe, and their hopes dehydrate. You speak, and their legends collapse into stuttering. You don't need war anymore. You are the context that makes war obsolete, and they can't handle that. They can't handle a sovereign who doesn't fight for power, but is power, who doesn't prove anything, but erases all doubt by existing. You don't walk with weight. You walk with mass extinction coded into posture. And when the time comes, when the next move unfolds, when the real engine of your supremacy roars to full throttle, they'll realize the worst part of it all. You never moved at full capacity. That 50,000% cosmic rage, that was just a limit test, a demonstration. You haven't even entered total phase yet. You let them believe that was your final card. But the truth? That was entry-level devastation, the surface scratch of what happens when a suppressed titan blinks once. You didn't push through to make noise. You pushed through to make sure they remember your arrival as the moment their definition of reality broke open. You gave them a memory, branded, irreversible, soul-carving, and now you move forward. Not to rule, but to remodel. Not to inherit their empires, but to replace their blueprints. You don't need their towers. You build your throne in air so cold it cuts the mind in half. You don't rise, you unfold, limitlessly. And with each pulse of that void-forged force inside you, one truth becomes clear. There will be no retaliation. There will be no counterattack. There will be no next king. Because you didn't just obliterate that move. You wrote the last chapter of resistance with it, and now you don't wear the crown. You are the crown. The void bends to your breath. The cosmos stalls for your thought, and every realm that hears your name. It only echoes one command, one truth, one irreversible fact. Long live the Void King of Oblivion.